Yes, we are standing on guard on AM Live this morning, and my panel is already in studio. Next to me, Dr. Mumo Nzau, Governance and Security Strategist, Dr. Mustafa Ali, Conflict Resolution National Security Expert. Next to him, we have Dr. Fatuma Ahmed Ali, who is an Associate Professor of International Relations at the USIU Africa, and Dr. Hassan, Khannenje, Director, Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies. And next to him, Joanne Kuria from Amnesty International Kenya. She is a policy analyst. Thank you for joining me this morning. And I think even as we speak about Human Rights Watch and the status of the same in this country, the first place we've got to start is this decongestion of a city. Governor Mike Sonko tried this on Monday. It failed miserably, but those that actually bore the brunt of it were those living with disabilities. Joanne, I'll start with you. Just looking at the situation on Monday, what do you think about the rights of those that were actually not thought of?
Thank you so much, Gladys, for having me. Well, I think from a human rights perspective, in just policy making and ensuring that our policies are gendered and we are including every single person, it just completely flopped. So in terms of just off air, you were talking about how people had to leave at 5 a.m. Now I'm thinking about women who had to leave to various places at that particular time. That obviously leaves them at a point of vulnerability. I'm also thinking about persons with disability who are unable to access the CBD because of this. So it was just not well thought out. From a human rights perspective, we did not engender it. We did not think about the human rights element to it. And that's definitely a flop on the side of the governor. Yeah.
Now, I'll jump on to Dr. Fatuma. Looking at the security status around the whole decongestion, coming into town was a nightmare. Even the footbridges were showing how much of an issue it was. And of course, going back home in the evening was even worse. So for those that are vulnerable, you know, it really put them at risk.
Yeah, and also thank you very much for having me. And also not only that from security perspective, also there was an economical element to that. So imagine people who have their budget and they already plan that every day I'll be using this amount of money, and that day they could not afford any other kind of means. So economically they wasted time, because some people are paid on hour. If you're working in a rural area, you have to arrive on time. If you work 8 hours, then that's what you'll receive. So and security wise, it was not well thought out. It was not very friendly to the people, because, as you say, if you're coming back by maybe 9, depending on where you live, you know, sometimes it's not really very safe to walk around that hour, especially for the women, you know, and you know, lately there have been a lot of incidents. So with this kind of situation, it creates room for those incidents to happen and probably to be justified, because then at that time, what were you doing walking around, even though the context is already there? So I think sometimes also for security-wise, it should have been thought well how this will work. I mean, think of people who live very far where they're working, the kind of jobs people have, you know, and also the kind of incidents that they might encounter. Robbery, you know, rapes, many things. And also the vulnerability that people have, not only gender-wise, not only economical-wise, not only social-wise, but also cultural-wise. So you have to understand also there are some cultural contexts that it's not really safe to be exposed to that kind of situation.
I understand. Okay, Dr. Khannenje, I mean, the security forces were also put to task about how they handled, you know, the whole situation. And looking at it from the governor's point of view, the incidences that were reported on the day of mugging and robbery were really high, meaning that was also not thought through.
Gladys, decongesting this city in itself, it's supposed to be a good idea. It is something that ultimately we need to figure out how to decongest the city, because frankly speaking, it's a mess. So while that might have been well-intentioned, good intentions do not always have positive consequences. And as we saw these past few days. Now, public policy should never be a matter of caprice. It is something that is a process that is followed in making public policy, because public policy is supposed to have much larger consequences over a longer period of time. Certainly, this is not something that was thought through at all. And hopefully, we're going to learn from this. Now, having said that, I think there's an element of policy making in this country that we need to really seriously discuss, especially when it comes to people with disabilities. It's not just that they were not thought out in this particular incident. How we construct our buildings, we never factor in people in wheelchairs. How we construct our roads, we never factor in people with disabilities. There are so many places, even as simple places and common places such as bathrooms and stuff like that. You know, you go in there and you wonder, what if I was disabled? What will I do? And something is a serious discussion we need to have as a country, and perhaps have a provision that if you are going to put up a public facility or something is going to be used by Kenyans and citizens, you must necessarily factor in or at least accommodate people with disabilities. And people with disabilities, not just those who can't walk, they're those who can't even see. You know, they're those who can. There are many ways of people, such people, you know, are actually experiencing a lot of hardships. Now, that the other effect that does with people on the other effect it has on them is it limits the ability to succeed in so many things. There are many jobs they can't apply. Why? Because they don't even have access. They know they can't be able to travel from point A to B. Our public transport system itself does not provide for people with disabilities. Understand? So how can I get onto a bus when I'm disabled? You know, unless someone is putting me there. And so these are things we need to think seriously, not just because they were unable to be transported, but even just going on that means of transport has actually been a tough task for most people.
Dr. Mustafa, it's interesting that just this Monday we were marking the World Day of People Living with Disability, and that it happens on the day that they were really inconvenienced. And in as far as accessibility rights for persons living with disability, as Hassan is putting out there, persons with disabilities are entitled to a barrier-free and disability-friendly environment for them to access buildings, roads, and other social amenities. But in this case, we saw they were left out there to fend for themselves, so to speak, and even those that were well had to haggle and, you know, hustle through the day. Going forward, what are some of the things that maybe the county government needs to look into to ensure that these people are included?
Thank you, Gladys. First of all, what we saw on Monday was a disaster. It was very unfortunate that first of all, the most vulnerable were the ones that were affected by the ban on matatus to come into the city. Women, the people with disability. Secondly, this should not come as a surprise to us, the disaster and mess that we saw on Monday. One is when we entrust public policy, as some of my colleagues have said, to a bunch of underschooled jokers who really do not understand how they can run a city or sensitive dockets, important dockets in government, and not just in the transport sector and this city of Nairobi, across many sectors in government, then we should not be surprised that such kind of a mess is happening. There are many other messes that have been happening, from the corruption that we see at NCPB, in the agriculture industry and many other places. The second point here is that the Kenyans have to take responsibility for some of these choices. We are the ones who voted these leaders into these positions, and we did not interrogate, or most voters did not interrogate their capacity to run such a city or to be in certain dockets in government. And we have to take responsibility. Instead of complaining, we should really be at the doorstep of these people and asking them to resign. The third point here, Gladys, is that such kind of people do not have in their head the plight or the specific needs of vulnerable people. It didn't matter to them that it was the International Day of People with Disability. I believe they did not even know that it was the day, International Day for People with Disability, and therefore they didn't care, and everything to do with the people of disability came as an afterthought. we should be ashamed of ourselves. Nairobians should be ashamed of themselves because of the leaders that they have, and Kenyans have to think deeper of what kind of leaders they want moving forward.
Dr. Mumo Nzau, good intentions implemented wrongly, clearly, especially the PWDs, that was an afterthought, because even as the governor was facing parliament, he said, okay, tomorrow we'll have buses to take care of them. Going forward, public participation is really, really important so that you get to see some of the, loopholes that are not obvious to you.
That's right. I think we have to go back to a little bit of the fundamental nature of the problem. Nairobi has for a long time been running on a city plan that was done in 1956, all the way to 59. And in between there was a lot of taking of shortcuts. And we've become a bit of a shortcut society each time. So this is the manifestation of a problem that has been on incrementally. It has been building over years, and this is now the visual expression of it. And so I know the leadership, people get the leader, the leadership you have is what we can't get other people other than who we have, and so we have a bit to respect that. And they have tried all they could, but I know they can learn better, because that is the way to go. We say in Kiswahili, kufanya kosa si kosa, kurudia kosa. So I think they should take their lessons. They should bring on board people who can think around it. There are good urban planners around, fiscal planners and scholars and people, urban, scholars of urban sociology and urban geography, who can think around this. We tend to think about the matatu termini laterally, but also we can think about it vertically. In places like Cape Town and the big cities, you still have places where the space is utilized going down and up. Like the metro system, even in places like New York or even average cities out there, is mixed up in a way that you have the matatu, sort of the buses and so on, but it is layered up, so you can have buildings. So we don't have to think like this. We can get experts who can help you. We may need to have, think about, even for starters, a tram system, and a sort of underground system. They have it, at least I think, a one-way or two-way in Addis Ababa, which helps out. Now, these problems are not unique to Kenya. There are places where it is extremely chaotic. I know that we had a bad day, but you can imagine the macroeconomic losses that we suffer every day from the congestion, from the jam and so on. The bypasses helped, but we still need to do more. Okay, we need to support. We call it social reciprocity. We can support the authorities. Where they are wrong, we should be able to point out, and I think the panel has said it just right. And I think positivity is what we need for this. And about people living with disabilities, there are many settings, even in buildings where you don't have the ramp, where you don't have specialized even places for sanitary facilities and ablution facilities and so on. So we've got to think about it as a society. People would want even to have all these things just in terms of the transport. But what about where you live? Just where you live. How many people in the flats where people live and estates do they take care about the people with disabilities? Just here in railways, there's our friend there. Is a guy I know. He's called Alex. We always just put him in. We carry him. We put him onto the matatu each time when I'm going down, say to South Sea and so on. So it's very important that we think around it like that, and not react in a lot of anger, but try to think a little bit more broadly around it. I know it was a bitter pill to swallow
yes,
for our people.
Yes, it was. Now, even as we continue to talk about human rights, remember, our conversation today is a Human Rights Watch. We are taking stock of the state of human rights in Kenya, 70 years since the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that was actually done on the 10th of December. That will be coming Monday. And it also is a season where we within the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. So on that note, would like to take stock of how it looks like in Kenya, and we shall be referring to the recent 2018 Human Rights Survey that was actually conducted by Amnesty International Kenya, Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, the International Commission of Jurists, Kenya Section, National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders, and the Social Justice Centers Working Group. Now, if we can have those graphics on air, the findings are that the situation is better but still unequal. Human rights have improved in Kenya since 1948, when the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights was actually adopted, and 2010 during the promulgation of the new constitution. Now, out of close to 49 million Kenyans, half of Kenyans do not believe that the law is applied equally. In short, that not all Kenyans are equal before the law. Now, also the findings from that survey indicate that majority feel high levels of wealth inequality and corruption undermine a core constitutional promise contained in the Kenyan Bill of Rights, and also only 33% of the population trust the police, a key law and human rights enforcement agency. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that is a huge revelation of the state of human rights in the country. And I will actually start off with you, Joanne. I know Amnesty Kenya was part of this survey. Why are you surprised that 33% of the population does not trust the police?
Well, actually, we were not surprised, considering the recent allegations of unlawful killings by the police, especially of young males in slum areas like Dandora and Mathare. It didn't come as a surprise. What was interesting, though, in the survey is that the mistrust levels were also pretty high for the police, yet Kenyans then go to police when they are reporting a human rights violation. So majority of the people go to police, but they also mistrust them. So that's like a duality of sorts, which sort of like says that maybe Kenyans don't have a choice. That because we know that the judicial process begins administratively with the police. And so we must then start there. But then it almost feels like I'm going to you, but I don't trust you. You know, just the other day at a roadblock at about 11 p.m., I was stopped by the police and I had not drunk, you know, any alcohol, and I was sure my car was good and I had my driver's license, but I just felt some angst. And I feel like that's a feeling that many Kenyans feel. You just, okay, you even start thinking, okay, maybe my car has a problem, maybe, and it probably doesn't, but just because there's a feeling that is elicited by the presence of police. And I watched The Nation yesterday evening, and I liked the conversation on police and unlawful killings. And one of the panelists, Joy Mdivo, said that it's high time that we demilitarize the police. We strip them off their, you know, the uniform, not physically, but just in our minds, because that's what we see and that's what we believe. And so, according to the survey, mistrust levels were pretty high. Kenyans did not trust the police as people that they would go to help them during a human rights violation, which I don't know, if we can't trust the police, then who can we really trust?
An interesting thinking, because going from that survey, there was also the fact, as you've mentioned, the extrajudicial killings of especially the youth that keeps on coming up, and especially on the headlines. And many have said the youth have gone missing, others have been killed and not even taken to court. And I will start with you, Dr. Hassan. When you hear of this and the kind of percentages we're looking at in as far as the young being killed by the police, what does that say to you in as far as our strides in human rights?
I don't know whether 70 years after the declaration is a more celebration of achievement of human rights or merely a reduction of human wrongs. And I think I go with the latter. I think it's a mere reduction of organized human wrongs, so to speak, because we're still in a fairly bad place, despite some of the purported progress that we have made. Now, as a country, the police is the first point of contact with citizens when it comes to law enforcement, when it comes to protection of their rights, as both civil liberties and other freedoms. That means it's the perception and trust or confidence in the police service is critical, because without that you can't even have the community assist you in policing. Most countries that are safer, it's not because they have the biggest number of police men and women. Actually, it's because the citizens have a lot more faith in the police service. Now, of course, the history of lack of confidence or trust in the police service, it does not start with independent Kenya. It goes back to the colonial times. And in part because of the police were used as an instrument, pretty much, of oppression for Kenyans at the time who were not independent. Now, the situation in terms of perception did not change much in post-colonial Kenya. And the disconnect between the citizen, and because when citizen looks at the police person, they don't look at them as another human being and a Kenyan who is supposed to be serving me. They are afraid to even actually approach the police unless they're really in dire situation and they can't help it. And what we're hoping is the recent police reforms perhaps move a little bit further away from that direction. Number two, the nature of how we also constitute and these conditions of our servicemen and women. You know, frankly speaking, we cannot do without the police service. You know, that is, if they were to be pulled out of the streets for one day, I think hell is going to break loose. But at the same time, we need to reform the police service in a way that is going to be responsive to the interests of the Kenyan citizens, but also in way in which is going to change the perception. When you see, let's say, extrajudicial killings that, for instance, no one is held accountable, that becomes a problem, even though those might be perhaps few rotten apples. But if every time you come across a rotten apple, okay, it is stinking, and every other time it looks as if the entire place is stinking, which might not necessarily be true. And unless we move honestly, and as Kenyans also change our attitudes, frankly, you know, speaking towards the police, but also allow the best men and women, or young men and women, to join the police service. Because just even go back to the recruitment itself. You know, in my day, it used to be, oh, you didn't make it to campus or to college, you know, perhaps you should try your place in a police service. Like, no, we should not be encouraging someone like that to do that, because our police service men and women, they're supposed to be among the best, you know, from us. And so several incidents of repeated impunity create this perception that we can't rely on you. However, Kenyans recognize that the police service is a legitimate body, institution. That is where you're supposed to report your cases. And so they really want still to be assisted by the National Police Service. And I think they're going to continue to do so. And so as citizens, it is helpful. At the same time, you know, I was watching the discussion on Sidebar yesterday, actually, and, you know, the police spokesman also raised something which was legitimate. When Kenyans see you getting mugged, a lot of times they don't even do anything. You understand? When Kenyans see a police officer being beaten up, some of them cheer up and they're going to clap. They're not going to defend that police person. And the police officer could actually be doing a very honest and legitimate job at that time. And it's not sometimes they're not even taking a bribe. They're simply trying to arrest a criminal. And so we need to change our attitude towards the police, but at the same time, hold our National Police Service more accountable and expect more. Why? Because we've entrusted them with our security and our lives as the first point of contact with government when it comes to law enforcement.
Okay, at this point, let me take you back to the report that was released last week. The Kenyan National Commission on Human Rights said the police were the main perpetrators of the 201 sexual violations that occurred during and after the 2017 general elections. Now, we know that none of those police officers have actually been brought to book, which also speaks a lot to the state of, as you were mentioning, repeated impunity, Dr. Fatuma.
I think it's very important that we're getting this kind of reports, because it will help us to reflect and think of certain issues that we actually keep silence on in our society. For example, about the power relation. And the report itself said that human rights is unequal. For me, the treatment I'll receive from security forces is very different from my sister there and from you. Why? Because of certain aspect that I might represent in their head. Security issues, societal issues, and many things. The other thing is that when it comes to issues of gender-based violence or sexual gender-based violence, in terms of this power relation with our security force, is that it's naturalized, it's normalized if these kind of issues are not even brought into the public domain for discussion, for reflection, for even commitment from our policymakers and our leaders, and even the police itself to be held accountable. Finally, what happens? We naturalize them, we keep quiet. So the same thing happened in 2007. Nothing was done. Then we have similar incidents. So it's going to be a continuous kind of a vicious circle going round. So I think also it's just the fact that we don't have the infrastructure to deal with this. The other thing also is we keep silent about it. Another thing, I think also sometimes we fear to say that, oh, the police were involved, and you can imagine the kind of debate that came out of there. It was a blame game, you know. And the other problem is that we need to deconstruct the whole idea of who is a victim and who is a perpetrator in our society, because we tend to think, okay, all these young people are victims, and that's why it's justified to kill them, because it's a way of dealing with the problem. All these people are victims, like the women. They can just keep quiet and they can continue with this problem in the society. So I think also it's a way, we need to make reflection on how to look at the power relation, reflect, deconstruct the ideas of who is a perpetrator, who is a victim in our society, and what is the role of the police actually in this kind of things, and bring them to account and books. So think of them as individual, not as an institution, because I think the other problem that we have with our security, they are no touch zone, because we think of them as an institution. So if it's a policeman who has committed a crime, even just, we've had recent incidents of them in domestic violence. So sometimes you don't think of that person as an individual, a husband or an individual who has committed a crime against humanity or a crime against another human being. You think of an institution. And that's also, it will help us come out of this blame game of saying the police or whatever, to really look at this individual in the society. What is the problem with the police? Is it a cultural problem? Is it the legacy that we have? Is it the power relation? And of course, if they're the ones who are supposed to give us our right, how do we take these rights from them? You know, rights are not given, they're taken, right? Another problem about violence in our society, I think it's high time as Kenyans we should talk about gender-based violence, all aspects of gender-based violence, the perpetrators, whether it is both sides of gender, and not only that, but even the impact of it in our society. How does it affect the children? How does it affect our social setup? What is happening with our social fabric? And put those infrastructure in place. For example, I know that when you go to the police to report those kind of incident, oh my God, you'll regret what has taken you there because of the culture. Okay, so if I go there and I say, you know, I want to report this incident, they'll say, you go and cook pilau, you know, go and keep your husband happy. Because also they've not thought through that they also have a role to play. Okay. So I think what is missing also is to look at those roles, who is involved, everybody in this society. So I think as a society, we should not say this person is in charge of this, but all of us, we should take part in making things function. Okay,
now, Dr. Mustafa, I remember a week ago we were talking about humanizing the police forces, and we were saying maybe it will be prudent if we looked at increasing the number of women in our police forces, and especially because we see during the election cycle is when we see a huge number of extrajudicial killings. So if we had more women in the forces, do you think it will probably humanize the force?
Absolutely, Gladys. Well, personally, when I meet a female police officer stopping me, I actually feel more comfortable than a male police officer stopping me.
And you're a man.
That's right, yeah. I have never been, throughout in my encounter with police, I have actually never been asked for a bribe by a female police officer, except for one incident somewhere in Hurlingham. But, you know, I can count, you know, 100 times when I've been asked for a bribe by a male police officer. So that's one thing. There's that a human face that our sisters come with when we are looking at security and dealing with certain aspects of life. The second point, Gladys, here is that it's first of all, I want to agree with what my colleagues have said. It's about the legacy. It's about what we also inherited from, you know, the colonial powers, the role of the police then. It's about the culture in this country, and not just Kenya, by the way, across Africa and a few other countries in Latin America, that you see the culture of violence is something, or the culture of not wanting to be orderly or to follow the law is so rampant. So even if we're going to really have a good police force, as long as culturally speaking, people still, you know, want to cut shortcuts, want to disobey or not to be orderly, we still are going to have a problem. And the police are going to be overwhelmed. It's also the power relations between the, you know, that person in uniform and that person that is supposed to be served by the police service. And if I was the IGP, first of all, and I believe he's watching, I wouldn't take those statistics lightly. I'd look at them. I'd look at the other reports that have been there before. And I think last year we also, early this year, last year we discussed the report from the International Police Academy that ranked the Kenya police service very, very low. I'd look at those statistics. I also know that the IGP himself has been very aggressive about reforming the police, and he's been actually going around and explaining to the police that they are really those who interact and engage with the public. They are really the ones that are the face of authority in this country, and they have to behave. And the recent launched police reforms is something that is very important and a milestone in the national police service, but there will always be bad apples, Gladys. I want to believe that the police officers that are doing the nasty things are few, and unfortunately they wear that uniform and therefore they represent the entire police. And those ones have got to be weeded out. They really have to. The police must come up with a mechanism. If the reforms are not working, they have to continuously look for mechanisms that are going to help them to weed out the rogue police officers that are involved in a number of the issues that have been brought up in the report. The last point that I want to say here, and I think we will not be helping this country if we don't say this. If you look at a country like Japan, and I gave this example earlier, the proclivity to disobeying or breaking law is very low. You'll find that out of a population of 100,000, maybe 6 or 7 will cut a shortcut here, or will disobey the law, or will break the law. Now compare that to a country like Kenya, where out of a population of 100,000, you'll find 2,000, you know, disobeying the law, breaking the law. And this overwhelms the police. In fact, sometimes they feel hopeless. When you go to a police station and you find a long queue of people, you know, reporting, my house has been broken, this has been done, I've been battered by my husband, you know, all manner of things. And, you know, they sometimes just, and I've seen very many good police officers just, you know, reclining on their seats and in resignation. We have to obey the law. We have to be orderly for the police to actually do their work and target the few, or rather those who are breaking the law. And as long as we still have very many people breaking the law, even the United Nations ratio of police to civilian is of 450. Is not going to one police officer to 450 is not going to work. You might end up needing actually 10 police officers for 10 Kenyans if we are going to continue breaking the law.
Okay, it's important to look inward, and Dr. Mumo Nzau, I'll come to you right after the break, even as we look at the fact that report, the 2018 Human Rights Survey, also indicates that mob justice justice is also a leading factor when it comes to violation of human rights. So even the citizenry has something to do with the violation of human rights. Well, when we come back, the conversation continues, even as we stand on guard on AM Live. Thank you for staying with AM Live. My name is Gladys Gachanja. We are standing on guard and today focusing on the human rights situation in Kenya. And this is coming even as we count down to the 70 years since the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and that was adopted on the 10th of December, and that will be next Monday. But even as we walk to it, we need to look at the status of human rights in Kenya. We are focusing on the same coming from the 2018 Human Rights Survey that was released the other day, and it's interesting to see how Kenyans say the situation now is better, but still a lot needs to be done because there's a lot of inequalities. But the fact that human rights have improved since 1948, when that adoption of the 70 years of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was done, is a good step in the right direction. And others actually say even more has been done since the 2010 Constitution was actually passed. Now, we have been looking at the unlawful police killings and harassment as one of the biggest risk factors to Kenyans. Now, and before we went to break, Dr. Mumo Nzau, you were to touch on the fact that Kenyans look at the police and forces as judge, jury, and the executioner. Hence, the reason why they have this kind of relationship they have with them. Just the other day, we were seeing this tuk-tuk rider who took up stones throwing at the police because he had it. But you were mentioning the fact that we all have a part to play in this. Explain.
Yeah, we have a part to play because, you see, the entire human rights debate is very rich. It's not only about physical security, but also, in the military strategic sense, but also in the human security sense. And you will be surprised in places where there's less of, direct threats like burglars coming into your house. People will call the police for anything, like my cat is stuck on the roof and such things. So we have to realize that the police don't operate in a vacuum. They operate in a society. And there is need for that social reciprocity and understanding about where it comes from. The fact that states signed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and by the way, that is part of a very long debate that, I can give you all the instruments, right from the Magna Carta of 1215, right to the Declaration of the Rights of the Man and the Citizen of 1789 during the French Revolution, the Abolition of Slavery Act, 1838, all the way to when Henri Dunant convinced governments that when people fight, there's need to take care of maybe the wounded, at war, at sea, in the land, and so on. So the entire Geneva Convention got its roots then, 1863. Then people forget the ILO Convention, the Labor Convention, how many children are underage who still work, So we're talking about the ILO Convention, and over and above that, then of course the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, then other things. Now, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights opened up space for, especially as a precursor, to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights of 1966 and the International Convention on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights of the same year. And then from there, because now when we talk about food, health, education, and all these aspects of rights that now opened up the debate, then we come to CEDAW, the Convention Against All Manner of Discrimination Against Women, and then the Convention Against Torture, up to the 1989 Convention on the Rights of the Child, which the US has never ratified. I'll tell you such reasons. And then now up to the Rome Statute and others. The only country that's never ratified. So it's very important that our people understand that they have a responsibility to first make sense of the law and why people have to live in an organized and regulated society. Because there are a lot of things that, in fact, the former Chief Justice Willie Mutunga said, there are a lot of things we can do out of just alternative dispute resolution before you even take them to the police. So, you know, of course, people expect a lot from the police, but people need to be a lot of education as practitioners, especially the human rights and civil society bodies, need to tell citizens also, you have a role to play. You have to uphold your own responsibility and so on. There are so many Kenyans out here who have so much money to give to the police to bribe them just to get shortcuts. Just to get shortcuts. You know, you won't believe how many people don't want even to pay their post office box. They don't want to pay, they don't want to pay, what do you call, land rates. They don't want to pay court charges. They want to shortcut for everything. And that is why probably we don't have enough money to run our public, you know, utilities. And therefore we've got to think around it in that way. Of course the police have got their own misgivings because probably a few of them take advantage of the situation. They know someone would rather give 500 rather than go to court and pay the full fine and such things. Then when it comes now to matters of gender-based violence and other things, even in, you know, these days we have a very interesting mix that sociologists and social psychologists have to think through. You have a homicide, so you have domestic violence, homicide, suicide all together. You just hear someone woke up and because of a fight with his wife, he beat up everyone, shot himself. That, you know, so you have a mix of, and we never used to have that. So you have a whole mix of homicide, suicide, and violence. And this brings in issues now of what we call, you know, egoistic suicide, anomic suicide, and what we call altruistic suicide. So those are three different things all coming together, which is a wider social problem. So we really need to be a little bit more broader and considerate about how we take it. We don't want to make the whole human rights debate in this country and in our countries to be just around the police. The police is just the first place of contact. Do you know how many companies are corrupt here? Insurance. People who interfere with the lighting on Sundays. I don't know if you've noticed in the estates on Sundays so that they work overtime. And we know the companies involved. It's a whole thing, you know. And there are people who are so corrupt. It's only because probably Amnesty and the others. You have to go around and ask some of these companies. Some companies are extremely corrupt. It's only that police is just the place of first contact.
I think at this point, to be fair, the unlawful police killings and harassment are just one of the pointers that fall under the biggest risk factors for Kenyans in that survey, and that's why we went for it first. But actually the leading risk factors for Kenyans according to this survey is actually the denial of health services. Joanne.
Yeah, so I actually have the survey right here, and health came out very strongly in many ways. So when we asked Kenyans which human rights are you aware of, 19% of them said that they're aware of the highest attainable standard of health as one of their rights. Then we asked them which human rights violations pose the most risk to you personally, and overwhelmingly a huge percentage of Kenyans said that it is their right to healthcare and health services in the country, which have been previously denied or they don't have access to at the moment. Also, it's interesting that Kenyans, 6 out of 10 Kenyans, that's 59%, say they haven't heard of the government's Big Four agenda. However, those who have had, what percentage? 54% of them say that they have heard of healthcare. I think the resonance of health and its access is very fundamental. It's a fundamental concern for many Kenyans. In the recent report by the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, A Silhouette of Brutality, it also outlines what happened during the election, 2017 election, and the gender-based violence. And one of the concerns was that the women who went through the gender-based violence or any form of violence did not have access to health facilities after that. And so it's interesting because we are celebrating certain milestones in health, but it's still a huge, huge concern. And many Kenyans said that it's exorbitant fees or costs. Others said that they've been denied access to these facilities without having to deposit, a deposit upon entry. Others said that health workers were brutal, or especially those who are coming up with issues of gender-based violence, were brutal or insensitive. So it's a whole myriad of issues surrounding the health sector that I guess this survey has highlighted that Kenyans are actually concerned about their access to healthcare.
Okay, it's interesting that you talk about the costs of the same. Being able to access health is a big issue. Dr. Hassan, the economics of it, I mean, we cannot move away from it. Just the other day we were talking about the quack doctor, and there is a reason why such exists. It's the law of supply and demand that has been created by this vacuum.
Gladys, we just don't have the quack doctors. We also have quack hospitals. And I'll give an example later. Healthcare should not be a privilege for the few who are wealthy in this country. It should be a right for every Kenyan. And the president's move towards universal healthcare, I think, is something laudable, and I think we should support him in that effort. However, we should stop building death processing plants that we call hospitals without equipment and without doctors. Every county right now wants to put up a referral hospital when the existing hospitals and clinics have virtually nothing. If you go in there, you're simply going to die. And most Kenyans are either one hospital bill away from bankruptcy or one illness away from death. And I think that is something that they're alive to. No wonder it's featuring as one of the most prominent risk issues, to many Kenyans. Now, some of the existing hospitals, because of the absence of, let's say, government-run hospitals with enough equipment and medical doctors to do their work, you have private hospitals that are charging exorbitantly. Some of them do not actually do a lot of work. I don't like to accuse private businesses, but recently, out of sheer negligence, my sister actually lost a baby because of negligence at Khannenje Nursing Hospital, which is more of a death processing plant, and a lot of patients have had the same experience. And part of it, because we just do not have government-run hospitals or supported hospitals that are actually well equipped to do that. And so private hospitals and private quack doctors, such as the one who's been violating Kenyans, are now taking and filling that vacuum. And even as we approach this issue, some of these private hospitals actually should be checked, because not only do they charge too much money, they're also killing people. They're not giving people enough treatment. And as I mentioned, one of them is actually in Kitale and does that. And there are a lot of people going to attest to that. And so we should move towards ensuring that every Kenyan has a right to health care as a right, not as a privilege. But at the same time, those Kenyans who are a little bit blessed, we should be willing to pay a little bit more to NHI, for instance, to cover more Kenyans. Even at the same time, personally, I would, for instance, ask that we pay perhaps a little less tax, instead of 30%, if we can move that tax towards NHIF instead of all of it just going to the, to IRA. I think it's going to cover a whole lot more Kenyans, because the current rates, frankly, there are certain things they cannot be able to cover for most Kenyans. So I think that is something that should be examined. And I know it's controversial, but as a country, we're going to need to pay a little bit more to be able to take care of all the Kenyans.
Dr. Fatuma, access to healthcare, very vital, especially in the day and age where we are dealing with preventable and treatable diseases like cholera, pneumonia, and most of these always goes back to access to that facility. The mother was not able to take the child. Why? Because they cannot afford to go to this hospital and access the doctor in terms of the fees and the medicine that is used for the same.
Yeah, so I think all these things speak to infrastructure. So it's a matter of how this infrastructure is set, whether it's economical, it's social, and even just physically getting there. Because sometimes we are thinking now, right now, our discussion is based on what happens in the urban setting. What about in the rural setting? Just think of a woman maybe in Northeastern. you know, who has like maybe 5 children, and they have to get their immunization, and they have to get this. Sometimes it's even difficult to imagine where will be the next stop, and even understand the importance of those having access to that. So I think also is the infrastructure that we have set, the services that we give, and you've had incidents of children being given polio vaccination, then they have to recall them back because they were expired and all this. So this means that even if we have this medicine, we're not even checking when is it expiring, when should it be given, who should it be given. And in fact, the other problem, as you said, is privatizing the whole basic rights, such as health. So in our society, we try to say, oh, we are very communal, we are African society, but we are very individualistic society. We've privatized literally everything that is basic in our community, just as health. And also we have created discrimination on those bases. If you can afford and you have an insurance, then you have the luxury. It's a luxury. You can go to Nairobi hospital, get the best doctor, get all this treatment. But if you're not privileged, or you're not blessed in that sense, so you're probably out and discriminated. The other thing also is, again, going back to infrastructure. Even though we have our national hospitals, the accessibility of that national hospital, sometimes you can come and you see a lot of people. So if the only place we have to treat maybe cancer treatment is Nairobi Hospital, honestly, and this is one of the medical health issues that is rising, you know, even with children. So it means that we're not even thought of how to set up that infrastructure. The other thing is that when it comes to health, health becomes a privilege rather than a right, because it is a matter of who can afford it. So it's not a matter of something that is very important. And I think it's very important to think of health as a right, because it's part of creating development in your country, sustainable development and peace. Because without a healthy nation, you don't have a healthy nation.
Very well said.
The state of our nation, health-wise, is not very healthy.
The debate on the have and the have-nots, she says, privileged versus the right to access healthcare. Some of the countries in the world, you will tell how good the system is because their leaders actually access public services. Kenya, we have a long way to go, don't we, Dr. Mustafa?
Yeah, we do. And as you say, you know, most privileged, actually not privileged, people who are supposed to be serving the public, very few of them go to our hospitals in the country. Even private hospitals, they'd rather fly to London or South Africa or India to, well, India now, everybody is going to India or Germany to go and seek medical attention. That means they don't have trust on our own, and I'll not be surprised, health workers and leaders actually going out of the country to seek medical attention. I'm not surprised that it's the health where a lot of corruption is taking place. I think we discussed in this panel before when we had very senior government officials in the Ministry of Health docket selling vaccines meant for children. 5.1 or 5.6 billion Kenya shillings getting lost. And then we see some health officials buying choppers and moving around. And then we ask ourselves, what is the problem? I think we know what the problem is. It's stealing and not paying attention to that particular sector. I agree with my colleagues. It should not be a privilege. It is a right. And if we have to, in fact, that is one of the areas that Kenyans should accept to pay more taxes in order to pay for a health of it. How many of us, just do a quick poll now between the 6 of us, how many of us have actually been asked to pay for medical bill for a relative, a sister, between us this year? I think you'll find that all of us have done that. And that's something that NHIF can take up. And you'll find that if we are to pay 2,000 or 3,000 shillings more, Kenyans would, then everybody would access quality medical service. commiserated with Dr. Khannenje when he explained this to me a little while ago. His sister actually also, because of negligence that happens on daily basis, and then we see what politicians do is to, because of political expediency, coming to say, oh, I'm going to do this, I'll build a hospital, I'll do, you know, those kind of pronouncements don't do anything. As long as we do not address corruption across the sectors, and particularly in the health sector, this is not going to work. And even if we're going to pay more taxes, and those taxes are stolen, then we will still be back to square one. Let me ask Kenyans. There's very little noise or protest about or support about what, for example, the DPP is doing at the moment, cracking down hard on corruption across all sectors. The churches are silent, the mosques are silent, the faith communities have actually gone silent about this issue that is pretty much a moral issue, an ethical issue. I'm sure the DPP feels alone that, you know, nobody is coming up and supporting the way that the president and senior other people who are now responsible for fighting corruption are. And this, what does this speak about us? When there is a political problem, we are the first, and even the faith leaders are the first to run to the streets and say, oh, we cannot X, Y, Z, but when corruption is being fought, now everybody is silent. Does it mean that they're condoning corruption? Yeah, I know some faith institutions, particularly a few organizations, are dens of corruption, but the true faith leaders and civil society organizations must come out and say, we support this war on corruption. And then we can see the health sector is going to improve.
All right. Now, Joanne mentioned the fact that a huge population does not even understand what the healthcare or access to universal healthcare is about. It's part of the Big Four agenda. Maybe you can start off with the basic definition. What is universal healthcare, and what does that look like and should look like so that it trickles down to every single Kenyan?
Yes, I can give that a try, although I'm not the minister for the CS for health.
In as far as the human rights are concerned,
but the idea here is to ensure that there are certain basic minimums that everyone should access. And let me tell you, it is not easy. You saw when President Trump came and said, "What is this? All this Obamacare, out with it," and all this, but it's part of what we call social welfare system, and states trying to carry the burden for the majority. But it takes a lot, because you need, you know, public goods are always in short supply because of the problem of the free rider problem and collective action problem. You need to pool resources. Now, the sad part is that sometimes when you have a strong middle class, because those are the people who are taxed rather. So when you have that, sometimes they are a little bit taxed more, and even the rich and so on, and companies and corporate bodies, and then that money is pooled. And then from a few contributions, you know, like the 500 now, I think it's about 500 that every month people do for NHIF. And a lot of people, you'll be surprised, Gladys, a lot of people, even workers in the city, they pay for their parents at home, for their relatives, to have to be on the NHIF and so on. So you can see it's still the middle class and the working class that is trying to carry the burden so that everyone can draw from that pool. Now, it takes a lot of efficiency, good planning, honesty, and commitment and patriotism to make some of these things work. And that is the big thing that we are lacking here. Sometimes these resources are there. You know, I want to tell our people here, our Kenyans, you know, that when you're a teacher and you take a bribe to pass a student and fail another one, you are hurting somebody's human rights. When you are a forester and your work is to sell seeds, because that's what some of them do, to sell seeds and take things, even you can imagine the head of state the other day had a whole fund for planting trees with the children. you know, and you don't want to know what they did with it, some of them. You know, and when you're a sports person, a coach, and a person in the, what do you call these sports committees, like for hockey, for boxing, and so on, when you pass the wrong people to go for the Olympics and for these games, and you leave the young child who has come from poor background, they are the best, you leave them out, you're hurting somebody's human rights. When you are a government surveyor, and you go to the government survey offices where you need the official government surveyor, you don't have money, you're poor, you can't, he will give you an appointment for 2022. But he will take someone else who has come here with, who is not even on the list, and they go to survey their land. When you are working in a government hospital and all you think is about how to open a side clinic and a pharmacy to sell drugs there so that you send patients there, you are hurting someone's human rights. This is the language we need to talk before we even pounce on the police. And we have also to tell the police, before you think about taking a bribe, ask someone why you're doing so. Why do you think you have to do? You have to face, because if we can pull all these, you know, if you give someone a ticket and they go and they're charged in court, the government earns. And people want now to believe that if we can pull this money, then it will go to universal healthcare, it will go to our roads, it will go to all this. And we don't want a situation where even when you are a political party leader, and so on, and your work is to sell, what do you call them, nomination tickets, instead of letting people get that and become rich, you're hurting fundamental rights of people. And that's why you're getting them the wrong leaders once in a while. So we've got to think about it in that holistic sense, and that's the whole idea behind the human rights. By the way, I wanted to mention that during the signing of that declaration, Eleanor Roosevelt, the lady, she was there. And you know, one of the countries that had problems that time thinking around the rights of the women was, for example, Saudi Arabia, that didn't sign. But later they signed it. And you can see from, is it just last year, they allowed the women to drive and so on. So we should also comparatively look at ourselves as a society that, you know, Kenyans, we know what we should do. Let's just do it.
Okay, and speaking of which, now that you brought up, you know, women, and I think this falls under one of the issues that came up as a high risk factor for Kenyans when it comes to the human rights, and we're talking about discrimination. Yes, it is at 9%, but it is a vital conversation to have, because it comes at a time where we just postponed the passing of the two-third gender rule, something that has been in waiting for a long time, especially, let's be specific, 8 years since the new dispensation. Now, John, when you look at it from that point of view, how far do we need to go in as far as eradicating discrimination in this sense is concerned?
Interestingly, Gladys, in our research, we found that equality and freedom from discrimination as a human rights that people are aware of ranked very low. Also, when Kenyans were asked, do you think that we are equal before the law, many of them said no. And the gender discrimination also ranked really low. So, I mean, I can't speak for the Kenyans that were polled, but this is my thinking. My thinking is that gender equality cannot be realized until we achieve basic rights. So when I had the two-thirds gender bill conversation, I wonder if we're approaching gender mainstreaming from a wrong perspective. I truly, as a gender proponent, do not believe that we need women in power for them to effect change for other women. I don't. And I think that is a tad bit controversial, because there's no research that has proven that having women in places of authority or positions of authority then translates to them doing anything for other women. On the contrary, there's some organizations that are headed by women that have serious human rights violations. So for me, so it's two-pronged. One, I think that Kenyans don't value gender equality as a thing because we're struggling for food. We're struggling for health. Those are the things that are top of mind. And 51% of the people that we polled are from rural settings. 49 were urban settings. The age bracket was the majority was between 24 and 35. So first of all, I feel like let's approach this gender conversation on a less idealistic path. Let's see the value that women actually have. I think it's more quality than it is numbers. So if we think about the women that we have in power, I just do not think we should have women for the sake of having women, because we cannot translate their worth, their impact by just having them in office. But also, I feel like gender equality is a conversation we must have. But top of mind for Kenyans is other issues, other partners. It's almost like the Mars hierarchy of needs. If I don't have food, if I don't have access to healthcare, I won't start thinking about, oh, I'm a woman, I've been denied this. No, I'll think about what I need to feed myself and my family. And so we'll remain an unequal society for as long as we do not give Kenyans access to basic human rights and just food, education, healthcare, if they have access to those rights. Yeah.
Dr. Fatuma, interesting points that Joanne brings up. Are we saying that we are not there yet because we don't have our house in order, in as far as the Maslow rule is concerned?
Yeah. So just to echo what my sister is saying, and just maybe to beef up some of these things, I think as Kenyan society we need to demystify some of this myth that we've created around gender in the first place. So people think gender are women, and that's why the two-thirds gender, people are not seeing the flip side of that bill. It means, you see, people are not understanding now what we have in our society is that women are not empowered. They are not in the level where they should be in order to, we are not tapping into the potential of women in our society, bringing women on board to think around certain policies, social policies, that we need, that women are actually the ones who are in charge of that because it's part of their gender roles and gender relation in the society. The other thing that we need to demystify is not when the word gender comes up, it becomes like a buzzword to mean all gender means women. Now, in our parliament, probably women are not the majority, they're not majority in our leadership, in our policy making, but in the next 50 years, this same bill that we're shooting down is very fundamental to bring the men who will feel probably marginalized then. Because sometimes it does not mean that now women are not there. In the future, probably it will be more women, like what is happening now in Rwanda. Okay, there are more women in the parliament than the men. So this kind of provision sets now a window to bring whoever is feel imbalanced in that equation. So I think that the problem is lack of awareness. We need to demystify and setting the priority. So for me, I think that it's very fundamental to bring women. I'm a big proponent of not only women, but anyone who is marginalized, whose voices are not part of the conversation of debate, to be heard, to be there, because, you know, nothing can be done without us. I mean, not only me as a woman, but anyone who is not represented. So you cannot help people if you're not bringing their voices. And I think in our society we are really missing that out because we are not putting it as a priority, as my sister here said. So the priority is a basic need, okay? But this basic need comes with a face, with this agenda face. So you see, men and women in our society, when it comes to that issue of discrimination, they don't have access to the same things. So for example, if you're going for employment, probably me and my sister here will not get the same kind of package that our brothers will get. Why? Because of our roles in society. They are the provider, but probably I'm the provider in my household. So no one will think of it that way. So I think also as society, we need to bring the idea of gender in all these aspects of basic human rights, okay? So when talking about healthcare, where is the man and woman in our society in this? How are they getting access to this? Because they have different needs and different vulnerability. The vulnerability I have as a woman is very different from a man, which means that both of us as human beings have those vulnerability. The other thing is about capacities. We are not even looking at issues of capacity. What capacities do we as women have in our society? How can this capacity be enhanced as part of the process of developing our society? Because if you say women are just at home, I think we are really in the Flintstone age.
Okay, now let me stop you right there, even as we try to figure out your microphone and move on to Dr. Hassan. Now, the Bill of Rights clearly states we need to have a democratic society founded on the principles of human dignity, equality, equity, and freedom. When you talk about the two gender role, we're talking about the inclusivity of all. Again, it is not a woman issue, it is a human rights issue.
Yes, in part because women's rights are human rights issues. 2 weeks ago, I said on this show that any nation that excludes 50% of its population reduces its prospect for growth and development by another 50%, which means if we've been dependent for 50 years and we've not been doing a good job in inclusivity, we've simply reduced our growth by another 25. So we are in 1980s still. However, I think part of the debate within the international rights, system has been one between the social, political rights, and then social and economic rights versus civil and political rights. Now, a number of Western democracies, such as the United States, for instance, they tend to put more premium on civil and political rights within the United Nations system, in part because social and economic rights impose certain responsibilities to those who are wealthy and those who are more well-off in society and in the world. Now, the challenge that we have, especially in this country, and as two of my sisters have mentioned, it is not the numbers that do matter. It's the quality of representation that does matter. Electing cartoons to parliament is not going to change the cultural negative perception that discriminates against the girl child. There are certain things in place that start from childhood that we actually need to change. And I posed a question 2 weeks ago that now, not just with the increased representation of members of parliament, for instance, but also increased representation of women reps, that are we better off today as a country than we were 10 years ago? Are women's rights better off today than we were 10 years ago? And that is an honest discussion that we should have, I think. And so as we approach the gender issue, because it's not just about women at the same time, we should look at it more holistically, but also try to address certain negative cultural constraints that are imposed from your childhood that actually prioritizes a boy child when it comes to certain things. And that informs even the perception that you could be having the same qualifications as me or even better, but culturally, perhaps someone might prefer to have me lead a certain thing when you're actually a better person to do that. So we need to start early on. It's also a societal problem, frankly speaking, and it has spread across the board. And so if we don't look at it holistically and we just look at the numbers alone, it's actually not going to help. And then today we have quite a bit of that representation, as I just mentioned. But when you actually look at the quality of what they're doing, even some of them do not understand the basic standing orders in parliament. Okay, then how are they going to bring a motion that actually is going to empower, that is more long-sighted, not short-term? It's going to be a challenge. So let's focus more on quality and changing cultural dynamics.
Okay, sure, Nzau, yes.
Yeah, just one adage. I'm supervising a PhD work at the University of Florida, at the Department of Political Science at the University of Florida. And this girl, she is studying about what you call gender quota laws and the impact of that on democratization. And she has a whole data set of all the countries in the world. And my work was to help her to carry out a focused comparison of Kenya and Uganda. And just wanted to applaud what our colleagues are saying here, is because quality is very important. Because you may have numbers where you have a lot of the women in leadership and so on. But of course, there's need also for that affirmative action where they need to be prodded to be there, because there are places where there are very big gaps. But it's also sometimes mind-boggling and hurting when you find positions are there, they're there, and the women don't even go for them, and they just don't, So, and the women are there, Dr. Fatuma here, and they just sometimes shy away from. So they really need to be prodded to go for them, because sometimes if there is not the lady, the female gender, then the male gender might take up that. And so we want that, but what we need is also to make sure that there's that equality of opportunity, so that it's there. Even if it was, you didn't go for it, but
At
you
least
had
it
the
was
chance. You had the chance. So it's very, very important to also look at it like that. But we should also, again, balance, because there are situations where the affirmative action helps a lot, and so on. I don't know if you can allow me, Gladys. There is a sad case we had in Kisumu, in Kondele. Kondele is in Nyawita sublocation, Winam division, is in Kisumu County. And there was this lady who was jailed because she was involved with a young boy who was a border vagabond,
Yes.
who had just discovered about this whole thing, and they were drinking down in Kondele.
Yes.
And then they take this lady in her childbearing age of 24. In African traditional society, in our culture, she's still more of a young person, like a child. And she should be, that is not the time to send a woman for 15 years. And they did nothing about the boy. They didn't help the boy. And I was asking, what about the alternative dispute resolution that Justice Mutunga was talking about? This is where the elders should come in. And I was asking, are there no elders in Nyawita that they should let children one to be jailed and the other one just to continue with this kind of bad life? Instead, they should have come in, cancelled this boy, put him back in school, and let the lady, because they met in this Kondele, So it is very important that people take these things a little bit more, because it's very important. The other thing I wanted to say, when you write a bad tweet, when you insult people in the media, social media, because you cannot be seen, that is also abuse
Violation
of your human rights. You're abusing freedoms and so on. It's very, very bad for Kenyans. Let people be more responsible with what they write about other people. That is why I have refused to carry these phones that have all these tweets and all these things. I have refused them.
Actually, he's not on WhatsApp.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very difficult to find him.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's his way of saying no to it. But even as we try and touch on other issues that fall under the biggest risk to Kenyans' lives, according to the 2018 Human Survey, is that hunger and inadequate low-quality food ranks also pretty high, as Joanne was alluding to.
Yes, I think one of the things that has come out of the survey is just the rising inequalities, economic inequalities. If we're still talking about hunger, if we're still talking about access to health, and it's interesting that, so Kenyans do say that the human rights situation has improved since 1948 when the UDHR was adopted, and 2010 when we got a new constitution, but still majority of Kenyans still feel that not all Kenyans are equal before the law. And the reason they cited for the inequality, number one, was wealth inequality. So economic inequality. Number two was corruption. And it's funny because I looked for ethnic divisions on that list. It was there, but it didn't rank high. So of course, that's just a conduit that politicians use to fuel us during the election cycle. But then I feel like it's something that Kenyans and our political class should look into very seriously. I remember reading an article not so long ago, a Business Daily, where one of the stats said that it would take a teller of a certain bank in Kenya 10 years to earn what the CEO earns in a month. That's ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous. Oxfam International released a report last year, 2017, saying that Kenya's wealth is 99% of Kenya's wealth is owned by 0.1% of the population. So about 8,300 people own 99% of Kenya's wealth. If this is not worrying to anybody, I don't know what is. Because economic inequalities just breeds very many other things. You begin to have, just the other day I was even asking you, can I drive to town because I'm worried? Because town these days, people get mugged. Somebody just walking past Nation Center the other day, her bag was ripped off. And it's a small thing that you begin to notice that creep into a society when our economic inequalities begin, the gap begins to widen. And we're not doing very well in terms of the index, the inequality index globally at all. And so when we start to have tenderpreneurs, when we start to have corruption cartels, when we continue to have politicians who amass a lot of wealth, who put aside a lot of things for them, including using legislation for their own benefit, of having, I want my second wife to be housed and for her medical insurance. I'm like, second wife is not a privilege. It's your burden. Hiyo ni mzigo wako, So I think we need to look at it from a policy perspective, and within a couple of years, we'll begin to see this thing on a serious scale if we haven't already begun to see it now. When we have infrastructural development, that does not mean that the country is improving economic. It doesn't mean that I have more money in my pocket. As a matter of fact, 1,000 bob now in a supermarket will get me 2 or 3 items. It will perhaps get me a whole lot more before. And many civil strife and revolutions that we've had across the globe has actually because I cannot afford bread. You know, are we at the point where we cannot afford bread, we cannot afford flour? And what is the government doing about it?
Now, it's interesting, she talked about how now the ripple effect is that we don't have food on our tables. Most houses will say they cannot afford the basic food on the table, but there's also the fact that there's some that feel that they have been denied the right to education because the same principle applies. I don't have money to go to school. Yes, they say education is free, but the truth of the matter is there's some aspects of it that are not. Mustafa.
Yeah, it's true that education is free, and well, not everything is going to be free, actually. The fact that the government has gone, you know, all the way to make sure that primary education is free is good. I think the other day Uhuru was saying it's up to 20%, and Kenya leads in Africa in terms of the budget that goes to education. That's good. Now, what is concerning here is the quality of that education, and that the 120 children in one classroom in Kibera cannot compete favorably with you know 15 children that receive personal attention in a school, in a private school, or even in yeah, mostly in private school. And these are issues that we have to interrogate and find ways how we're going to make Kenya more equal. And if we my sister the far end was saying, if we are not seeing the problem yet, I think we're going to see it down the line. When you look at some of the Latin American countries, El Salvador to be in particular, it's highly unequal society. Currently, it's now the murder capital of the world. There are more people who are killed in El Salvador than in Syria and Somalia combined every year. Wow. In a war situation. And there is no war there. It's during peacetime, but just the unequal society. Yesterday I saw, or on Monday, a lady who was clearly affected by the transport, the policy that was introduced, and say, if nothing is going to be done, tutaanza kuiba. And that's a clear indication that Kenyans are generally hardworking, or majority of Kenyans are hardworking, and we must, or those in policy, in leadership, must work very hard to make sure that they create enabling environment for Kenyans to actually you know, work hard and feed their families. Gladys, what I have to, and this, I don't want us to lose this point. Hand in hand with the Universal Declaration of the Human Rights is the Convention of the Rights of the Child, CRC. And next year we are marking 70 years of the Universal Declaration of the Human Rights and the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is the most ratified treaty in the history of the world by all countries around the world except one, the United States of America. There were 3 countries that had not ratified. That was US, South Sudan, and Somalia. Now Somalia has ratified, and South Sudan has also ratified that particular treaty. Now, when you look at the challenges that children are facing, every hour 5 children are killed in a violent situation. 1 billion children are subjected to different forms of social, economic, sexual violence every year out of the 2 billion. That's 50% of the children. 120 million children are subjected to the worst forms of violence, including sexual exploitation, and girls suffer more from that particular kind of sexual exploitation, including online exploitation, which is gaining currency. Now, if we are not going to deal with these issues now, then we should expect that we are going to be a troubled society. Research has clearly shown that a child that is you know, assaulted sexually is definitely going to commit the same crime. 99% of the time going to commit the same crime when they're adults. And these are issues that we seem not to be dealing with. The sexual, the legislation that is there, including in Kenya, in my view, is too lenient to the perpetrators. And we've seen this year alone the number of children that are raped, including toddlers that are raped, boys that are sodomized. And most of these people go actually scot-free. And if we are not going to address this issue, Gladys, it is going to trouble this country down the line.
And I like the fact that you brought that up, because even as we are within the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, we cannot ignore the fact that we've had reports coming out, one stating that 1 in every 5 adolescent girls aged between 15 and 19 has had a live birth or is pregnant with her first child. Most of them attributed to SGBV. Yes, Dr. Fatuma, you can speak on that. And as we speak, Kilifi County has the highest teenage pregnancy and child abuse cases.
So I think, I mean, this is some of the disturbing things that we are keeping quiet on in our society, especially with that issue. Teenage pregnancy, there are ways of dealing with it. You know, it's high time that we should think what is going on, because it's clearly an issue that is happening in our society. This is a very serious concern. And that's also, when we look at access to education, also you see that most of these girls, it's within the education system, whether it is the teacher or even their peers, you know, the borders, all this surrounding. So I think also we need to really address this vulnerability that young people have, whether children, whether men, whether boys or girls. And the other thing is that, I mean, when I went to school, you hardly had girls getting pregnant in school. So, and that was not a long time ago, maybe 30 years ago. But right now, I mean, it was so, how to say, not frustrating, but a bit disturbing, you know, the kind of issues that is coming up in our society. And also we have to address this. Yes, the problem is there now. How do you deal with this? Giving room to also the girls who are already in those kind of situations, like the nursing mothers who had to go do the exam and then breastfeed. And I think also we need to really address, and it goes back to education. So what are we educating our children on? What kind of education are we packaging? So seriously, we need to discuss sex education. We need to discuss issues of values with our children, and we need to make reflection on the kind of education that we package and how safe is this education system, not only the access to it. So what else are we giving our children, and what else are they taking away? And not only that, but also even trafficking, issues of radicalization. You know, kids have been radicalized in schools. So it means that now schools is also part of the site for many things. You know, and if in the case of Kilifi, you know, most of these incidents were reported by border. So how are the border now thinking of those girls? It's not like children anymore. They're looking at them from another kind of lenses. And I think the other problem is that in our society, these are the kind of things that we hush. You know, even parents, even if it's your daughter who is found in that situation, what do? You try to go take her for abortion, and then you lose both. You know, your future grandchild and your child, instead of really dealing with that. The other problem is our justice system. So that kind of a person probably will tell, go slash grass or something like that, you know. So these are very, very serious things, and in the future the impact will even be more grave, because there are things that we are not addressing now. And violence is violence, and violence breeds violence. So if you don't address one type of violence, it will definitely have a spillover into another type of violence.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, even as we close with our parting shots, I think I'll start with you, Dr. Mumo Nzau. In as far as the human rights status in the country is concerned, we've touched on a different number of elements that make the list of what Kenyans consider to be the biggest risk factors to their lives. And today, this needs to be addressed. Going forward, what is your parting shot?
What we would like to see is the counties now to have more social workers who visit schools, who visit families, who visit centers, who talk one-on-one with the children, the girls, the young girls and so on, and who are very much in touch with the issues affecting the youth, especially in their early teenage years. This is very important that we invest a little bit more on the social workers, people who have records, who actually go to the families, to the communities, because there's a missing link there.
Yeah.
And we need to see that more, because like Ambassador Amina Mohammed was saying, I mean, when you have a child, just a child of 12 years, 13, you know, getting a child, then now there are a lot of things they can't do. They are tied down. And it's probably things that they did out of, you know, just ignorance, and some of these others are simply abused. So there's need for that social work. Social workers, we really need them at the county level.
Yes.
And then the other thing is to ask our people to be more responsible. Even when you're a matatu owner and you are told that fuel went up by just 4%, then you hike your own fees by 200%. You're also not being responsible.
And you're violating,
human
rights.
Other people's rights. And they do it all the time. So people need to think around this aspect of human rights, not just as a police issue. Of course, the police have got the IPOA and the internal affairs division within the police. All these need to take their responsibility more seriously, to have more inquest files and to follow them through, so that the individuals involved are brought to book. So very important that we take it from a rounded point of view.
Dr. Mustafa?
Yeah, Gladys, the issue of the violence against children has reached unacceptable levels, and those are issues that have got to be addressed. And we, on top of investing more in social sector that Dr. Mumo is talking about, we have to invest a lot more on taking care of our children, to make sure that they are not subjected to the kind of violence that they're subjected to on a daily basis.
Okay, Dr. Fatuma.
Yeah, and I think also we need to really revisit our curriculum as an educator. So just look at this curriculum and have other support system like mentoring for young girls, and probably how to say, role modeling for their future, and also the society. You know, like we need to have an element of community participation in this process. So for the boda guy who impregnates somebody, they should think of all those things, and they should participate, not to have these different cells of people in our society as very apart. And sometimes also try to participate in our upbringing of our children. Right now we have other things that educate our children. Social media, Nickelodeon, all these cartoons and all these things. So without you knowing, your children know more about the world than you. So probably some of us, we were educated by the community without realizing that that was a very physical contact of education. But right now, all this is in the digital world. You don't even know who is telling what to your children, what do they know, how do they think about the world. And the children are very vulnerable and innocent in that sense, because everything they get to hear out there, you know, they're in this age of experimenting things. And that's why I think sometimes as adults, we don't bring ourselves down to thinking of we were children once. And all these things happens. But right now, our children are more exposed to many other different things.
Okay, in closing, Dr. Hassan, even as we look at the state of human rights in Kenya.
Gladys, as we celebrate 70 years in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I would like to remind Kenyans that rights do not come cheap, and freedom is not free. They come with duties and responsibilities, but must also be jealously guarded for them to be sustainable.
Well said. And of course, Joanne, this is your area, your forte, even as we look at a survey that says, well, the situation looks better, but still unequal.
Well, I think in light of the findings of our report, I would like to say, like, 70 years ago when the adoption of the UDHR, when that happened, that was 1948. Kenya was a different state then. So I would first and foremost would like to celebrate the gains that we have achieved. We were not a sovereign people. Our economic rights were not, we didn't even have economic rights. The Kipande system, gender was not even a debate. You know, we're completely marginalized as women. So if we look at it in that light, I think from 1948 to date, we have achieved a lot. So I think coming to it in a celebratory mood and tone is very important. Looking forward to 2088 and seeing what are we leaving for our kids and our grandkids is also an important aspect to it. Are we going to, will they look at us and think, what were you guys doing? Were you guys asleep on the job? So I think that is now what we're doing now. We're reflecting on that. We're also smack in the middle of the 16 days of activism. So I'd like to encourage everybody to speak up and speak out against gender-based violence. It's not a women issue. It's a community. It's a country. It's a continent issue. If women are affected, the entire family is affected. And finally, as we celebrate Universal Declaration of Human Rights next Monday, that's December the 10th, I'd like to encourage all Kenyans to do something. As Amnesty, we have constructed like 70 actions to do. And it's not anything, as you know, as Daktari was saying, human rights it's not a precept of Amnesty. It's every single person can be a human rights defender. So pick up litter, plant a tree, open the door for an elderly person, stand up for a pregnant woman, babysit for your neighbor, do anything that is an act of kindness, because that is human rights.
Very well put. Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Mumo Nzau, Governance and Security Strategist, Dr. Mustafa Ali, Conflict Resolution and National Security Expert, and Dr. Fatuma Ahmed Ali, Associate Professor of International Relations at USIU, Dr. Hassan, Khannenje, Director, Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies, and of course, Joanne, Kuria, Amnesty International Kenya Policy Analyst, even as we talked about the state of human rights in Kenya. And remember, as they have mentioned, we are in the middle of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence that comes to an end on the 10th of December, which will mark the Human Rights Day and also a celebration of the 70 years since the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So do your part, even as you expect other systems to do their part. Have a lovely day. My name is Gladys Gachanja.